Hey listeners, it's your host, Dacia. So this episode, featuring Daron Hagen, is a belated birthday tribute to composer Ned Rorem, who on October 23rd turned 93 years old. Happy birthday, Ned! Ned is apparently still doing it up, which is awesome. I'm also subtitling this our French intellectual episode, so get out your black clothing and absinthe and let the culture wash over you like you've fallen off of the left bank and into the Seine River. Ew. And also, don't forget to subscribe to, rate us, and review us on iTunes because that's what Ned asked for his birthday. I assume. All right, enjoy the episode. My name is Dacia Clay. I'm the audio librarian here at Classical 91.7. While I'm a real librarian, I have a deep, dark secret. I know very little about classical music. I grew up listening to rock. And I know something about jazz. But when it comes to classical... But I really want to learn. So, every week on this show, a classical music expert will give me a piece of classical music they think I should know. And then we'll discuss it. Come learn with me in the classical classroom. How goes it?
Oh, fantastic.
Good.
So happy to hear your voice again.
Yeah, you too.
No one is going to have the faintest idea who I am.
Oh, I'm going to tell him.
You're going to tell him like I'm a god, right?
Yeah, that's what I do. I make stuff up about my guests and make them sound really great. Although, okay. Todd's giving me the we should get going.
Okay.
thing. Okay. So, hello everyone and welcome to the Classical Classroom. I'm Dacia Clay and here with me today for the second time, because he missed us, is Daron Hagen. He's joining us from the cat-friendly studios of the Radio Foundation in New York. Daron is a composer, a librettist, an essayist, a pianist, a recording artist, and a conductor, and a stage director. Goodness. He's written over 350 works of various genres for the concert stage, soloists, ensembles, and organizations alike. He's been the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Friedheim Prize, and an Academy Award? Good Lord.
Not from the Academy in the West Coast, just the American Academy of Arts and Letters.
That's good enough for me. He's been the recipient of an award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. His work has been recorded on many labels, including Naxos, Bridge, and Albany. Daron studied composition with Ned Rorem at the Curtis Institute, among other things, which brings us to today's topic, which is going to be the composer Ned Rorem. Daron, welcome.
It's so great to be here.
Why don't you tell us why it is we're going to be talking about Ned Rorem today?
Well, the timing is great because Ned is going to turn 93 on October 23rd.
Wow.
He was an American composer, is an American composer and diarist, who won the Pulitzer Prize in 1976. And he was my mentor at Curtis, where I first met him in person at my very first composition lesson 35 years ago this month.
Wow. That's crazy. And so what's his story? Why do we need to know about Ned Rorem?
You know, we've been friends for, 35 years, but even though he's a man of both notes and letters, I think that he would prefer to let his music introduce him. I know that you have a copy of one of his songs written when he was just 22. He once told me that he felt that nostalgia is the bread of creativity. And it certainly seems that youth wasn't wasted on Ned. This is a song called Early in the Morning, and it uses filmy harmonies a la Poulenc, and they're heard through the ears of a young man who was at the time in love with the artistry of Billie Holiday. And there's a nostalgia about being young, beautiful, and living in Paris.
Oh, man. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's hear it.
Breakfasting on croissant and café au
Nice.
An amazing thing for a 22-year-old person to have written.
Right. It sounds like somebody much older sort of looking back on a memory. Yeah.
And, Ned is famously a Francophile, obviously, but he had already deduced by his teens what the difference was between an art song and a song. And that's a whole program right there. Maybe we'll talk about that another time.
Define art song. I have talked to somebody about art song. I've honestly forgotten what the definition of art song is, though. Can you explain that to our listeners?
An art song uses customarily a text of high literary quality that can stand on its own as a poem rather than just as a lyric.
Gotcha.
But by that measure, I mean, certainly, Ira Gershwin's lyrics and Cole Porter's lyrics are standalone art songs, and that's where the delicious gray area kicks in.
And is that kind of where Ned Rorem firmly fits in, is in that company?
Well, certainly in his 20s. Ned, however, was further into the art and further away from popular music. Their so-called highbrow, middlebrow, and lowbrow culture. Ned, by the time he was 28, was already living in Paris and hobnobbing with Poulenc and with Boulez and the great minds of his time and our time. He was born in Indiana in 1923, and one of his favorite interview starters back when I first met him at Curtis was, "I'm a Quaker, I'm an atheist, an alcoholic, and a homosexual." And then he would just wait for the interviewer to sort of pull themselves together.
That's great.
So that would have been in the early 1980s. We've come a long way now. People will say just about anything on the radio, but back then it was a lot trickier. He went to Northwestern. As a kid in the Middle West Wood. Then he went to Curtis and finally Juilliard before heading off to Europe, Paris especially. The rest, as they say, is history. But the cool thing about Ned is that he wrote his own history while he lived it.
Really? Yeah, I noticed. I did notice, just kind of briefly looking him up online, that he's a writer who's written quite a bit.
Yes. He was only 28 when he published his Paris diary, the first of, over a dozen books of diaries, essays, works about music, memoirs. Here, I'll give you a taste of. I have to brought one.
Yeah.
With
Yes,
me.
please do.
I was riding the train down from Rhinebeck, where I live, and just put my finger in at random. And here's page 184. Lenny Bernstein has been once more to talk to me and of me. And though I know no one more astute, I cannot feel close to him because he plays at being close to one. He plays at being the real thing. His reality's unreal. I like true unreality, hate reality. Venice is truth. There is no real difference between the texture of Scriabin and Berg. Drink and recover in order to drink and recover in order. That's how it's been during ever-awful June, and forever it'll go on, I know. The tension with which I imbibe can be matched by the delicate care I take to eat liver next day, to recover and drink. Meanwhile, I don't work, squabble with laziness, postpone, let time pass. Now, of course, the essence of that is that Venice is solipsistic by design. So the whole paragraph's about solipsisms, and it's brutal what he's saying about Bernstein, and deeply perceptive, but it's also so self-aware.
Right, yeah.
So for a 28-year-old man to be functioning at this level is something that just can't be taken for granted.
Well, and just as an aside, I was just noticing, what is it about the French and Francophiles that, there's this great sort of diarist history. I think of Anais Nin, Henry Miller, who else? Even Proust was sort of his writings were read very much like a diary or a journal.
Well, that's a great thing you point out. Yeah, I mean, in letters, that tradition has all but died out. Now we have blogs. But it took a lot of courage during the 60s to publish these diaries, outspoken, openly homosexual. Ned took a lot of flack. There was a lot of blowback for this. Now everyone who has a blog feels that they're a diarist, and in a way they are. But, Ned was the czar of American Facebook posters long before Facebook was invented.
Well, and how did this inform his music? I mean, I know that there's a certain muscle that you build in your brain when you are a regular journaler, a regular diarist, when you've become practiced at knowing yourself in this very sort of confessional way. How do you think that lent to his music?
That's a great question. I had a teacher in high school named Diane Durfler who, in her first class, she taught lit, went up to the board and wrote, "Art equals life," and then wheeled around at us and said, "What do you think of that?" And that was sort of the beginning of a lifetime for me of living what is called the examined life. And we all examine ourselves now in a postmodern way because we take selfies and we keep blogs and we look at Facebook and project our image of the happy family that we possibly are not having onto our Facebook pages. That's different, though it captures the surface of what living a truly examined life is for an artist. And I think that's a rather roundabout way to come around to saying that Ned knew, as not just a person who was self-aware, but who was beautiful. I mean, physically just gorgeous. He's 92 years old and he's still deeply attractive as a person. Yeah. To look at oneself and be aware that one is loved and admired just as an art object in one's self, but not just to be an object of affection or admiration, but to write about it. And to not just use it as a skill set, but then to be aware that beauty itself, even as pointed out by Early in the Morning, is so fleeting. To have nostalgia for your own beauty when it has never left.
Oh, yeah.
That's the examined life.
Wow. I think that perhaps the difference between, hearing that diary entry from him and hearing that first piece and what you're talking about people do now, and this is a broad generalization because I don't in any way have disdain for social media or the modern day or anything like that. But I think that what we've become really good at now is cultivating a persona, whereas I think that there's something about actually sitting down and writing a journal, writing a diary that forces a certain amount of real honesty, a sort of development of the person instead of the persona.
Well, that's really wonderful because, yes, there's a difference between the studied superficiality of Francophilia, the fact that Poulenc or Debussy must be performed without emotion, let's say. You don't have to sell Poulenc. If you do, you're not doing it right. In fact, that performance, I'm sure, is a very famous soprano. But I don't particularly care for the performance because it's sold. The song is better if it's just done straight. But now I'm going to hate emails from a dozen vocal coaches.
You've done it.
I've played the piece in front of Ned with singers, and he always tells me to do it straight, as it were, to not sell it. I think that there's a difference between superficiality and surfaceness. And it is to appear beautiful and to be aware of one's beauty is to go into the Oscar Wilde world of that which is observed. And what I think you're pointing to is, no, I have no contempt for social media. I think that Ned was, as I said before, it wasn't just a quip. I think that Ned had Facebook down, social networking down 60 years before Facebook was invented. They were just his diaries.
Yeah.
But his aperçu and the bon mot that he created in the tradition of great diarists was those were hard-fought stylizations of truth. And that's when you turn truth into art as opposed to 140-character tweets.
Yeah, interesting. That nuance is really important because there's some art to the confession. There's some art to the divulging of secrets and things like that. And there's a style that's developed and like, yeah, absolutely.
Dacia, hold on to the word nuance. Because that's how I would finish the whole conversation.
Okay, I'm going to hold that till the end.
For sure.
Well, we should hear some more music. What's another example of Rorem's work?
So we just have been talking about his early life, right? Let's skip to his midlife and play the first two brief movements from Air Music, a big orchestra piece.
Okay. Okay, Daron, you've got to tell me what's going on in this music. This is crazy.
Like everyone who survives, Ned got sober and he settled down with James Holmes and he got down to work. This was in 1976 that he wrote Air Music. It garnered him the Pulitzer Prize.
Wow.
And the Academy of Arts and Letters embraced him. He became a member a few years later. It's safe to say that he became, and was, even during his drinking years in Europe, probably the hardest working composer I've ever met besides maybe Gusty Thomas and Michael Torke. Like Copland, Ned had his accessible side early in the morning in the art songs, and I'll always treasure those, tuneful Protestant hymns coupled with sexy Ravellian harmonies. But he also has this really brainy, tart side, the pure contraption part of him, where the thing that I love about him is when he alternates the two sides of his personality, not movement to movement, but within the same movements. He has some great pieces for orchestra, like Sunday Morning is one of them, based on the great Wallace Stevens poem, and also his terrific String Symphony, which maybe we can go out listening to some of the String Symphony.
Yeah.
It stands up with the Copland Third, the Harris, all of the great American Third Symphonies. But, as Ned, I just had all of these opinions that I said, and Ned would be the first person to say that subjectivity is boring. He, about 20 years ago, moved into his third period, I think. He had sort of an eminence grise, a gray eminence period, where he became the late era Ned, where the good stuff, the really good stuff comes, I think. And I was lucky to work with him when he'd reached, I think, the peak of his powers. And as we've alluded to, I think 50 years before Facebook and blogging, Ned had already turned social networking into his art form. His writing and music, they look so easy.
Yeah.
They read fast, like Simenon, who he loves, but they conceal enormous brains, and know-how. He knows how to make things look easy. Nowadays, at the risk of sounding like one of those old men who says, "Get off of my lawn," it's very hard not to skip straight to sounding and being easy at the same time. I think there's a big difference between nuance and vagueness. Big difference between subtlety and just plain ambiguity.
Yeah.
But ambiguity is a good thing, but there's a difference between ambiguity and confusion.
Right.
And I think that level of self-awareness is considered pretentious now by most young composers. Well, and it's replaced with irony.
Yeah. We love our irony.
So do I. Isn't it ironic that here I am talking about irony?
Yes. But I want to go back to something that you said earlier, which is that so Ned got sober and he settled down and then did his music experience an evolution with that major shift in his life. I mean, that's a big deal to go from being a big drinker, and he was also living in a different place. So it sounds like his life completely changed. And was there a continuity between early Ned and sort of middle Ned?
That's an excellent observation. I think that it would be possibly simplistic to say once Ned got sober, he started writing ugly music. I certainly would. But when I became sober, I just became more of who I was. And I think that in 1976, modernism had reached pretty much of a critical mass here in the States. When I was a student at Juilliard in the early 80s, the modernists were still in control of things. Jacob Druckmann, a colorful modernist was at the Philharmonic. Philip Glass was down in the Village. I remember we all trooped out to BAM to see the premiere of Nixon in China. So all of these things, neo-romanticism was just about to pop on the scene. David Del Tredici was about to be named composer in residence with the Philharmonic. So Ned writing in this sort of complex style, I think, was partly an embracing of what intelligent musicians were saying to one another. But it was, when you listen to that air music stuff, I must draw a parallel to the last time I was on the show. Remember those chords in Britten's Billy Budd?
Yes.
That's exactly what Ned does for the theme of air music. So there is a line that can be drawn from back into the 20s and 30s through Ned that Ned used to say, well, when it comes to modernism, I never started smoking, so why should I quit? He's full of these wonderful things that are so quotable to this day. He still interlaces the complex, dissonant textures with those solo strings being quite wistful and nostalgic and lovely. I don't think he ever moved too far away from it. In the last 20 years, there were more process pieces, more pieces that were about working out ostinatos versus chord sequences.
Wait, what's an ostinato?
Ostinato is a repeated pattern of notes.
Okay.
And what it does is it creates sort of the musical equivalent of gesso on a canvas.
Yeah.
The
stuff that like makes your canvas tight, like it makes it so that you can paint on it. Yeah.
And precisely. So what an ostinato does for music is it lays down for complex art music the same sort of invisible backbeat that people yearn for with commercial music.
So what I'm kind of hearing you say about the arc of Ned's creativity, and I'm sure this is a wild oversimplification, but he kind of starts out very personal. Like that first piece that we heard, I mean, it's just clearly about his experience as being a young person in Paris. And then the piece that we just heard is a lot more angular, and it's embracing the sort of style of the time, but you're still hearing him. You're still hearing who he is as a person. And then it sounds like what we're about to hear is going to go even further, that it's going to go even further into this sort of angular process music area than it is going to be about the personal. It's kind of like his art kind of moves away from, like you said, the subjective into the objective. Would that be accurate?
I think that is certainly how it appears from the outside, and yet music doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't actually signify anything. Another one of his great quotes is, if we called La Mer La Strada, would it be about the street instead of the ocean? Mm-hmm. We may feel that because of the nature of that wonderful Robert Hilliard poem and the setting that Ned gave it, that it is personally revelatory, and that air music is not, but in fact they may be equally artificial in intent or design.
I see.
And Ned, that's again going into the subtlety of Ned Rorem. He wants you to love him. Mm-hmm. Just as Lenny wanted people to love him. And he once said, or Lenny once said to him, the problem with you and me, Ned, is that we want everyone to love us, but we can't meet everyone. Which is, it's not entirely arch, and it's a damning thing to say about oneself. But I think that what happened with Ned is he at some point, as most people do when they grow up, and I think he had to become sober to pass through this, and he had James Holmes, who was such a wise and marvelous man to be with. He realized that it was far more important to be understood than it is to be loved in the end. And I don't think that the truth is particularly beautiful all the time. And I think that he embraced that.
That reminds me of, what was it, The Breakfast Club? When Ali Sheedy says, when you get old, your heart dies. Or your heart dies when you get old. That's what it almost sounds like. He's got this disconnect from this focus on love and interpersonal relationships and recognition and
I think that again that is often how people react to the films of Truffaut, for example, that they are about the death of love or about being emotionally inaccessible. When in fact I think that in Ned's case and in so many French artists' case, one understands that love is not enough, that love must be earned in an ongoing way, and that it is lost easily. And that acknowledgement, if you are involved with manifesting love in your work, you mete out, and not meat like in meat and potatoes, but METE.
Right.
You mete out with greater precision and restraint, perhaps, as opposed to just laying on the nice goopy, what we call unresolved 11th chords, in Misty. Because it's very easy to be loved. All you have to do is write something pretty.
Be lovable.
But it's very hard to be love-worthy.
Well, we should hear some more music. I want to hear some of this unlovable music.
Now here's the first movement of his string symphony that I talked about earlier. It is steeped in nostalgia. And he wrote it while I was studying with him. I was his copyist, as was the custom back then before, computer copying and all of that. I was his hand copyist. He was truly my mentor. And I should say, before we cut to the music, as they say, that one of the reasons I wanted to talk about Ned for his 93rd birthday was because I got to know him sitting in a practice room accompanying a singer in Madison, Wisconsin as an undergraduate doing Early in the Morning. And I would have been you would have blown me down if I had known that 2 years later I would be having my first lesson with Ned and Curtis. And he, without probably giving it much thought, gave me a chance to be part of a world that led away from the Lutheran orthodoxy of the Midwest to a world of the sensual and the aesthetic and the creative that was far greater than I could have had. So I will owe him forever for that. And the level of sophistication is something that can be aspired to.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
Happy birthday, Ned. You know, this could be Bernard Herrmann's music for
I was going to say.
a Truffaut film, you know, Fahrenheit 451.
That is so cool.
It is neat. So that's very processy, right? Those are what are called quick canons. And what all of this hubbub issues into is this sort of crazy drunken waltz, which is very satisfying. There it is.
It even reminds me of like a Hitchcock film in a way.
For sure, Bernard Herrmann.
Yeah.
There's a very, very wonderful liminal zone between someone like Bernard Herrmann and someone like Ned. I remember when I was a student going through Stokowski's scores, and there would be bread and butter letters from Copland right next to Bernard Herrmann's letters. Everybody wanted to be performed by Stokowski. So all those marvelous, horrible partitions between high and low culture are broken down, and that's a great thing.
Yeah. I really like this.
Doesn't this sort of feel like having had too much to drink?
Yeah. But it's got kind of like a dark tinge to it, too.
Well, being drunk in a bad neighborhood, maybe.
Yeah.
or you started out at a really good party and you ended up in a bad neighborhood.
Yeah. Or being drunk in a bad mood.
Hear how poisoned it is?
Yeah.
And now he's gotten himself back to where he started. And that's the thing about someone like Ned, is that he's so smart that he understands that it's in the transitions between these states. And it's very easy to discount someone like Ned Rorem if you only hear one or two pieces, because you think, oh, he's one of those guys who sounds like Bernard Herrmann, or he's the guy who sounds like Poulenc. Or it's not that he's eclectic or derivative, it's that he's smart enough to go to that neighborhood, get drunk, and leave.
It's interesting, you know, I can hear what you're kind of saying, that there's like, if you like listening to this music from his early, middle, and late period, you can really sense the through line that is, I guess, the person of Ned Rorem in those works, even though they're so different. I think that's so interesting.
Yes, and I think that is the wisdom that comes from someone who has been paying attention. You know, Ned knew the repertoire, and he didn't he never reinvented anything.
Yeah.
It's very, hard to take seriously someone who is being ironic about the Rite of Spring, who doesn't really know what the Rite of Spring was about.
Yeah.
It's far more compelling and persuasive to hear someone like Ned do one of these poisoned waltzes and realize that there's an intellect and a knowledge, a wealth of knowledge, a breadth of knowledge there that insists on being heard and not dismissed. That which is amazing about someone like Ned Rorem, a true intellectual, a true stylist, and a composer, a man who was a composer who wrote and a writer who composed. We think of Virgil Thompson. A couple of years after I left Ned's studio, he was in an expansive mood and said, there's exactly as many years between me and Virgil as there are between you and me. And I thought, well, gee, that's really very moving. Thank you, Ned. And he said, I didn't mean it that way. And that in some ways sort of sums up what it's like to know Ned Rorem for a long, long time. To know Ned is to understand him, not necessarily to love him, but to get him. And I think that in all really, really good, mature art, it's more important to get it than it is to love it.
Wow. That is a great place to stop. Daron, thank you so much for introducing me to Ned's work. I can't wait to listen to more of it.
Oh, this was so fun.
Yeah, and we have to say, happy birthday, Ned.
Happy birthday, Ned.
93. That's amazing. I hope he's
still beautiful, still all there.
Daron Hagen, thank you so much for coming back to the Classical Classroom. It's been great to talk to you again.
Take care, Dacia.
All right, everybody, that does it for this episode of Classical Classroom. For more Classroom, go to houstonpublicmedia.org/classroom. Follow us on all of the social media links you'll find there. Email me at dclay@houstonpublicmedia.org. Subscribe to us, rate us, and review us on iTunes, because when you do, my mom really likes it. Thanks today to audio producer Todd-ry Hulslander for making us sound nice. Thanks to editor Mark DiClaudio for his piercing reefer madness eyes. Thanks to Larry Josephson at the studios of the Radio Foundation in New York for helping today. Thanks to Daron Hagen for coming back to the show. Thanks to me for saying words, but most of all, thanks to you for listening. We'll catch you next time.